let's get to the next example, which is another story completely. So we have actually a middle game position. For white, it is still an opening stage because the king is still in the center, and so on. So again, let us start with the evaluation of this position before creating candidates list and trying to calculate possible lines. So the most noticeable problem in white's position, for example, is exactly the king. So king is still in the center, bishop c4 controls diagonal a6 f1, preventing castling. Rook is already on d1, so it's not possible to castle long. So the king is here in the center, looks like almost forever, or at least for a long time, which means white has some problems potentially. We can also see that bishop on b2 is under attack, so we can see this queen attacking the bishop. At the same time, we should understand that if we have such a king, our opponent wants to attack it. So how to attack the king directly? For example, we can notice this b4 square, so this queen can get to b4 with the direct attack against our king, and it might be a problem because our king is limited. So this is about weaknesses in white's position and possible threats, possible problems. As for advantages, so we can see very active knight on f5. So it is very close to opponent's king. It exerts direct pressure on squares like and pawns g7, h6. Our bishop, by the way, bishop b2, also attacks this g7 pawn, so actually this pawn is under attack at the moment. This knight also controls e7 square, which is a square of possible check, so we have to understand that, and just to inject it in our brain to remember this possibility of a check. Also, what else? White has a bit more space probably, but this doesn't matter here, because again, position is not very clear, and this position actually might become very sharp very soon, because opponent already has a concrete threat of queen b4 at some point. So we have to be extremely careful. So as you can see, that is about main features of this position. So that is kind of evaluation process. By the way, a few words about this typical mistake about evaluating who's better, right? So understanding who stands better. Actually, it's not so easy to come up with this answer, and in the majority of cases, it might be not correct, because you never know before you started calculating concrete lines. So I just offer you to avoid this waste of time. So your focus is to understand main features, main vulnerabilities in your camp and main vulnerabilities in opponent's camp to direct your thinking. So since g7 is under attack and h6 is potentially vulnerable, and also e7 square is a square of potential check, and mainly due to the activity of this knight, we have to focus on the king side. And now it's time to create candidates list. By the way, I missed one very important detail as for vulnerable pieces. So we discussed vulnerable squares, vulnerable points in black's position, but we didn't discuss vulnerable pieces. Actually, bishop on c4 is vulnerable currently, so it is not protected, as well as the knight on c6. So such pieces are usually possible targets. So they are potentially weak, tactically mainly. So pieces that are not protected, you can attack them to combine several attacks and so on. So let's create a candidates list now. Checks. First, checks. So two possible checks here, knight e7 and knight h6. It's not so hard to understand that. It is probably not so easy to get something with the help of those checks. For example, knight takes h6, pawn takes h6, and what is next? Okay, something changed in the position. I mean, this diagonal became completely opened, so probably we can continue with the queen c3, creating a threat of a checkmate. But it's not clear if it is a good idea, because black has a defense. So here we can see that white's queen can, attacks the bishop and at the same time attacks g7 and h8 squares. So this is a sort of a double attack. So when you see such a situation in your mind, again, when you visualize such a position, you have to ask yourself a very important question. So what my opponent will do? So actually an obvious question, but you have to focus on possible defenses here, because at first glance it looks like a great idea to make this sequence. So to prevent a checkmate, black can block the diagonal, but that is not very good because of queen takes c4. And okay, maybe you don't win a material, but because your bishop is hanging, so I mean, if you take knight on c6 next move, black will take on b2. So position still will be not clear. But even if you don't win that knight after king goes away or something like that, we can see that white achieved something. So pawns are deadly weak, you have pair of bishops, position tends to be opened, and well, this is potentially very, very dangerous for black. So this f6 is not a move, but what else? It looks like it is the only possibility. In fact, black has different options here. So knight d4, one of them, bishop d4, one of them, but what is more important, queen b4, which stops white's attack completely, because after queen b4, the queen is pinned. So inevitably it will be changed, it will be traded, and after that black will simply have a decisive material advantage, an extra minor piece. So such a move is not that obvious. However, you have to be sure that it doesn't exist if you want to come up with the knight takes h6 and queen to c3. So here we get to another tip. So be aware of opponent's resources. Never forget about opponent's resources. So every time ask yourself a question: what I might have missed, for example. And also another very important tip, create candidates list for your opponent as well. So just imagine you play with black in this particular case and try to focus on best resources for your opponent. It is, by the way, another typical psychological trap. So we usually try to find best continuations for us, but usually, or at least sometimes, fail to find the best continuations for our opponent. Well, I don't know exactly the reason for this psychological problem. However, it exists, believe me. So we usually overestimate our position and underestimate opponent's position. So to avoid this, you have to focus on opponent's resources. So it is a prophylactic thinking, more or less, but the main part is to ask yourself a question: what my opponent can do here? And this question just directs you to searching for best moves for your opponent, not just so, okay? So queen b4 stops. So after calculating this line in your mind, we can make some conclusions. So first of all, we have this interesting possibility of queen c3, just attacking the bishop, and g7 simultaneously. So if we have such a possibility, why on earth should we sacrifice the knight? So we can do this immediately, right? So as you can see, we increase our candidates list, just adding another active move with the attack, with the double attack. At the same time, we can see that there is a possibility of queen b4. So it is not only an attacking move, but also a good defensive resource to pin our queen. So having this in mind, we can conclude that, okay, maybe queen c3 is not that the best decision because queen b4, and okay, our queen is being exchanged and black has no problems, our king still has problems, so probably we will be in trouble. So checks are already considered. Of course, knight e7 is also possible with the same idea. So after knight takes e7, then only queen c3. There is a difference because queen b4 is no longer possible, but I don't think black has much problems after, let's say, f6 move. So queen takes on c4, okay, king goes away and position is unclear. Bishop, as you can see, is hanging. King is still in the center, so black is ready for active operations, and well, the knight can get to a very good square on e5, so position is definitely unclear. So knight e7 doesn't work. Now for captures. Actually, we have several captures. One of them was at the same time a check. Knight h6, we already considered it. Queen f4 makes no sense because of queen takes b2, so the bishop is hanging. What else? We have a very natural move to capture the pawn on g7 with the bishop. So bishop is hanging, we attack g7 pawn twice, so why not to capture that pawn? Because at first it looks like a very important pawn, and again, at first this move bishop g7 looks simply devastating because after that king g8 will be permanently weak, and the decisive attack looks like a question of a few moves. So we have to calculate bishop g7. So after bishop g7, black still has this queen b4 check. And we have to start exactly with this because it looks like the most dangerous for white. When we try to range opponent's moves, creating candidates list for him, we do the same. So we range in the correct order. So first checks, then captures, and only then active moves with some threats, and in the very end moves, just general moves, improving position, and so on. So queen b4 should be considered first. And after queen b4, appears that white has to put the queen on c3, because if bishop goes to c3, which looks just a great move with the tempo, attacking the queen, right, and creating a sort of knight takes h6 with further attack, and so on, appears that black has a decisive tactical trick, using the fact that, well, our king is still in the center, queen pins the bishop, which means that some squares that were controlled by that bishop now lack defense. So knight goes to e5. Brilliant move, actually leaving the queen hanging on b4, but the point is that white has no chance to take that queen, because if bishop takes, the knight takes f3 with the checkmate. So here the vulnerability of our king becomes really noticeable, right? Knight takes f3 and that's it. Game is over. And it is possible to predict, I mean, this knight e5, which probably not that obvious for not experienced players, to predict in your mind if you made a correct evaluation of the position. So when we discussed this position, when it just arose, actually we catched this fact that our king is limited. So this means we have to be aware of all resources that black can use to attack our king somehow. So all active moves towards our king, for example, like knight e5 here. And what is the problem with the knight e5? That queen is attacked, right? So if we can't take on b4, if we can't take the knight, then we have to save our queen somehow. But as you can see, all squares on the third rank are controlled, which means if queen goes away from the third rank, then bishop is hanging. So queen takes c3, winning the game. So actually, this means after queen b4, the only chance for white is to play queen to c3, after which black, for example, has this rook to d8 move, and the further attack appears not that dangerous. For example, if knight takes on h6 with check, king easily goes to h7, and again, position is far from being clear because black has very active pieces. For example, e5 move, which looks very promising, leaves bishop g7 not protected. So king simply takes on g7 and it's all over. Black has decisive material advantage. Well, so despite some material disadvantage, position looks very promising for black, not for white. That's why bishop g7 doesn't work. So here, when we have this great amount of information, we can focus on something else. So since our bishop is hanging, we can't take on g7. Knight h6 looks not so clear. Knight e7 as well. So we have only one active move that we didn't estimate properly, that we didn't calculate at all at the moment. So we only made an assumption that probably it doesn't work because of queen b4, defensive idea. But come on, let's get back to that move because it looks promising, and at least it creates very concrete threat. So we have to calculate it properly. It is move queen to c3, attacking g7 and bishop on c4, which is vulnerable. And pay attention, knight on c6 is vulnerable as well. So this queen now controls this whole file, and if nothing else happens, for example, it will be even very hard to save all that pieces. But come on, black has this queen b4 that we already understood calculating other lines. So we have to check queen b4. Again, just imagine everything happens in your mind. So to understand what to do in this moment, just imagine you play this game with white pieces and this position is in your mind. So first you have to visualize it properly, to see this position as if it is already on the board. And then to ask yourself a question, to try to evaluate it again quickly. So what changed? What's wrong with black's pieces, for example? What's wrong with black's squares, and so on. So we can see if there is no queen on b4, well, we just capture on g7 with the checkmate. Queen on b4 in its turn is protected by only the knight c6, which is vulnerable as well. So actually everything is based on this knight on c6. So knight on c6 is a key piece here. And in such a situation, the most natural idea is to try to deflect the knight somehow. So to force it moving somewhere, and to leave the queen, for example, hanging. And it's possible to do because we have this knight e7 check, which was not that great on the first move, but now conditions are new, so now it works, if we calculate it properly, of course. So knight goes to e7 here. Natural idea to try to deflect the knight from c6. And white wins, because knight is invulnerable, it is check. So if, for example, knight takes on e7, then queen simply takes queen. That's it, game is over with an extra queen. If queen takes the knight, because it is also possible, there is no longer pin on diagonal a5 e1, so queen simply takes on g7 with a checkmate. This is also good for white. So the only possibility for black is just to go away with the king somewhere, let's say king h7, after which we can simply take the knight on c6, no more threats, and white simply wins with extra minor piece. That's it. So here, as you can see, position was probably a bit more complicated if compared to the previous example, to the first one. However, we tried to do almost the same. So first evaluation, then creating candidates list, then just a quick calculation of different moves that look at first glance not very promising, like knight h6, knight e7, then more detailed calculation of bishop g7 move, which looked very natural. And here we also came with the idea of being aware of opponent's resources, being very careful about opponent's resources. And also here we can see an interesting method. So calculating one line, we found additional features. So additional feature was queen to c3 idea. And another additional feature was this queen b4, the move that helps black to save everything. So these moves we can miss, for example, when we analyze the initial position. So we can just not include them in our candidates list. But that's how it works. So you created a candidates list. For example, let's imagine you missed something. Then during calculations, you just see interesting ideas. And then the next stage is to ask yourself, can I apply those ideas in the initial position, for example, or in other lines, just to compare those lines. And this may increase your initial candidates list. And that is very important because this allows you not to miss very good and promising continuations. And also this allows you not to miss opponent's resources. So to pick some interesting ideas from different lines and to apply them in other lines. So in one line, it might be not good, but in the other line, it might be just the best idea.